I did not set out to marry the 13th princess of the vael'keth dominion. I also did not set out to accidentally change the political standing of my entire species at a canapé table. But life has a way of ignoring your plans entirely, and doing whatever it finds most entertaining. My name is Marcus Vael. I am 34 years old. I work for the Human Diplomatic Corps, and until about 2.5 years ago, the most remarkable thing I had ever done was survive 3 consecutive years, stationed on Conclave Station Theta 9, without losing my mind. The station orbits a dying star at the edge of neutral space, and it smells, permanently and mysteriously, of something between burnt copper and overripe fruit. Nobody knows why. Nobody talks about it. That is diplomacy in a nutshell, really. Humanity joined the Galactic Conclave 11 years ago. We were the newest members, the youngest species at the table, and everyone was very polite about how little they expected from us. 34 other species had been part of the conclave for anywhere between 200 and 12,000 years. We had been in space, properly in space, for about 80. The Thranosi ambassador once described humans to a colleague, not knowing I was standing 3 feet away, as charmingly premature. I smiled. I had learned to smile with my lips closed, because 32 visible teeth tend to make other species feel like prey. The summit that changed everything was a cultural exchange gathering. 6 weeks, 40 species, 1 station. My job was simple. Represent humanity. Don't cause incidents. Eat whatever was placed in front of me without visibly reacting, and under no circumstances make direct, sustained eye contact with the Thranosi, who go cataleptic if startled. I was doing reasonably well until the first evening reception, when I turned too quickly to avoid the ambassador and walked directly into someone standing behind me. The drink in my hand, something purple, something that smelled like a forest fire, went entirely onto the ceremonial sash of the person I had just collided with. I looked up expecting fury. What I found was a face that was looking down at the spreading stain, with an expression I can only describe as mildly entertained. She was vael'keth. I knew this because her skin had that faint luminescence, like moonlight trapped under glass, and because she was standing entirely alone in a room full of hundreds of diplomats, which only vael'keth ever managed to do, not because others avoid them, but because the vael'keth themselves project a kind of composed stillness that makes a crowd part around them like water. She looked at the stain, then at me, then said in perfect, unaccented standard, "Well, that is the most interesting thing that has happened in 4 hours." I said I was sorry. She said the sash was a gift from a council member she found deeply tedious, and that it had, until 30 seconds ago, been her biggest problem of the evening. I laughed before I could stop myself. She looked at me like I had done something unexpected and valuable. Her name was Sereth Val. She was the 13th princess of the vael'keth dominion, which meant she was royalty in the way that a 13th child is royalty. Technically correct, practically decorative. More relevantly, she was the only vael'keth in recorded history to be born with a harmonic anomaly. The vael'keth communicate through resonance, frequencies that carry not just meaning but emotion, memory, and subtext all at once. Sereth Val resonated at the wrong frequency. She had been deaf to her own species, and they to her, since birth. So she had learned to speak 11 languages, in words, with her mouth, the way humans and a handful of other species do. Her court considered this faintly embarrassing. The rest of the galaxy considered her an oddity. She had attended 17 diplomatic summits and, she told me that night with a flatness that was clearly covering something deeper, had never once had a direct conversation with anyone. Always translators, always proxies, always the careful, mediated exchange of meaning through layers of technology and protocol. I did not fully understand what that meant to her, not then. To me, talking was just talking. I told her what I thought about the summit's opening ceremony. She told me it was philosophically hollow, but visually competent. We argued about this for 45 minutes. I forgot to be afraid of her. She forgot, I think, to be lonely. The summit ran for 6 weeks. I kept running into her. In corridors, in observation lounges, at the edges of formal dinners where neither of us particularly wanted to be. Later, much later, she told me she had been engineering these encounters with quiet precision, and that I had been the most oblivious subject she had ever studied. I believe her. I had genuinely thought she found my company professionally useful. She challenged me to 4 different strategy games. She won all of them, some of them very badly for me, and I kept demanding rematches. She taught me 3 words of spoken vael'keth that I could not physically pronounce correctly, and she found my attempts so genuinely funny that she stopped trying to hide it. I brought her human food, small portions, carefully selected, because she had mentioned once, very casually, that she had always been curious. She approached a piece of dark chocolate with the concentration of someone diffusing something dangerous, and then went very still for a moment after tasting it. "That," she said, "is extraordinary." It was one of the best things anyone had ever said to me, and I had done nothing except hand it to her. Halfway through the 3rd week, a political crisis erupted. 2 species, the Dravathi and the Solek combine, had a long-standing territorial dispute that boiled over during a session on resource agreements. The situation required immediate mediation, and the council turned to the vael'keth delegation, which meant they turned to Serethval, the only member of her delegation who actually wanted to be there. The expectation was that she would mediate through formal harmonic resonance, the traditional vael'keth method. She could not do this. She was about to stand in front of 2 furious delegations with no voice that either of them was culturally equipped to hear. I stepped in. I did not have a plan. I had been listening to her for 3 weeks, and I understood, fairly well, how she thought, how she found the pressure point in an argument, how she reframed a conflict in terms that made both sides feel they had been heard. I translated her spoken words into a mediation framework, shaped it into the kind of careful diplomatic language that formal proceedings require, and helped her walk both delegations to a provisional agreement in just under 3 hours. When it was over, she looked at me for a long moment and said nothing. I thought I had overstepped. I asked if she was all right. She said, "You did not ask for permission." I said, "I had not thought about it." She said, "I know. That is why it worked." 3 days later, she informed her court that she intended to pursue a bond declaration with me. I learned about this approximately 4 hours after she had told them, when her senior court advisor appeared at my quarters with the practiced expression of someone delivering news that has physically hurt them. The vael'keth bond declaration is permanent. It carries legal weight equivalent to a formal treaty. For a princess of the Dominion to declare a bond with a human, a species that had been in space for 80 years and still used chemically propelled projectiles in some of its conflicts, was not merely unusual. It was, constitutionally speaking, a crisis. 3 council members went into resonance lock upon hearing the news. One simply broadcast a sustained tone of pure disbelief for nearly a minute. Serethval told me herself, directly, in words, which was apparently the most inappropriate way she could have done it, and which did not seem to bother her at all. I asked if it was a political arrangement. She said no. I asked if she was certain. She said she was 112 years old, and had never been more certain of anything in her life. I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, "I would like that. I would like that very much, actually." Her advisor, who had followed her, and was standing in the corridor pretending not to listen, had to sit down on the floor. The opposition from the council was not simple hostility. The deeper issue, I came to understand, was this. The conclave's older species had collectively, quietly, decided that humanity was probably temporary. We were young, loud, emotional, and statistically likely to solve our conflicts in ways that would remove us from the equation before we became genuinely significant. A bond declaration between a Dominion princess and a human was politically absurd because humans, in their estimation, did not yet matter enough to be worth the complexity. Serethval found this logic infuriating. I found it, after sitting with it for a night, genuinely motivating. The council invoked ancient law. A non-vael'keth suitor seeking royal bond declaration had to complete 3 trials of resonance, a process designed, over thousands of years, for vael'keth physiology. They were not designed for humans. This was not a coincidence. The first trial was the echo chamber. The suitor stands in a resonance room and withstands a full-spectrum harmonic broadcast for a set duration without collapse. For vael'keth, it tests emotional and psychological depth. For me, it was like standing inside a very large bell while someone rang it, repeatedly, from every direction. I stood there. I did not collapse. I described it afterward as a philosophical experience. The council was baffled. Humans, it turns out, have an unusual relationship with sound. We evolved in environments that required us to adapt to noise, to absorb it, to keep moving through it. Nobody had accounted for that. The second trial was the memory recitation. The suitor must speak, before the full court, a complete account of why they seek the bond. Vael'keth do this through resonance. Every shade of meaning carried perfectly in frequency. I had to use words. The court considered this a lesser mode of expression. I gave a 7-minute speech. It was not polished. I did not rehearse it. I talked about what it feels like to represent a species that the galaxy has already decided is probably not going to matter. About meeting someone who talked to me like I was already worth something. About not being particularly courageous but being far too stubborn to behave as though things were impossible just because no one had managed them yet. I said that I did not have a resonance frequency to offer, but that I intended to show up, consistently, and without being asked, for as long as I lived. Sareth was the only one in that chamber who understood every single word. She was also the only one whose expression changed. The third trial nearly ended it. The suitor must generate a resonance note, a pure, sustained harmonic, that the princess can recognize as a bond frequency. Vael'keth spend years developing theirs. I am a human. I cannot produce harmonic resonance. The council declared it finished. Then Sareth did something that no vael'keth had done in formal proceedings in recorded history. She hummed, out loud, a physical sound, imprecise and biological, and entirely her own, the spoken word equivalent of what her bond frequency would have been, if she could have broadcast it the traditional way. It was quiet. It was very simple. And I had spent 6 weeks listening to her voice, and I knew that interval, and I echoed it back. Not cleanly, not with anything approaching vael'keth perfection, but recognizably hers. The chamber resonated. The walls caught it. 2 council members went into resonance lock simultaneously. The senior advisor sat down on the floor again. The vote passed. It was not unanimous, and I respect the ones who voted against it. They were operating by a logic that was internally consistent, even if I thought it was wrong. But it passed. The bond declaration was recognized, and attached to the ruling, quietly, almost as a footnote, was a secondary resolution, a formal review of humanity's status in the conclave, moving us from provisional membership to full standing partnership. A process that would normally have taken decades of careful, grinding diplomacy. So done in an afternoon, as a consequence of a princess who had gotten tired of standing alone at parties. The wedding was held 4 months later. There is no protocol for a vael'keth human ceremony. We invented one in real time, with input from her court, my family via long-distance transmission, and a neutral conclave officiant who confessed halfway through that this was the most interesting thing that had happened in his career. 17 delegations attended. Most of them came out of political curiosity. Most of them left having enjoyed themselves, which is its own kind of diplomatic achievement. 2 years have passed since then. Humanity's position in the conclave is not transformed overnight. It does not work that way, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. But doors have opened. Research programs that were closed to us are not anymore. Colony proposals get fairer hearings. It is a start. Humans, historically, are very good at starts. Sareth is no longer the princess who could not resonate. She is the princess who chose a different frequency, and the distinction matters enormously to her. Her court still finds her faintly embarrassing. She considers this high praise. She has taught 3 council members to hold spoken conversations, real ones, in words, and found that 2 of them, once forced to use language directly, have more to say than anyone expected. Last week, the Thrinosi ambassador asked me, through the usual 6 layers of protocol, whether I had planned any of it, whether there had been a strategy. I told him the truth. I turned too fast trying to avoid him, spilled a drink on a woman's sash, and then could not stop talking to her. He broadcast 40 seconds of pure, sustained incomprehension. I took it as a compliment. When I told Sareth, she laughed so hard she cracked a viewport. We had a very good night.